Welcome back to Beernid 40K. Whether you're a diehard cultist subscriber that's been with me for a long time or somebody just finding the channel, I'm glad that you're here. Thank you for choosing this, even though there are so many great YouTube channels out there talking about 40K, talking about Kill Team. Just want to say right off the bat, thank you guys. So I've been doing a lot of thinking. The dust has settled over the last big Kill Team event, the LVO, the Las Vegas Open, and the internet is abuzz right now with people claiming Tyranids are really something special in Kill Team, which they are. I play Kill Team with the Tyranids myself, and I love them. But with the bugs taking top place, a lot of people online right now are claiming that these Tyranids are actually the new meta in objectives games. But the question is that true? Is a single list really unbeatable? You have to remember, at Las Vegas Open, it was a 20-man roster, a full roster to bring a single list to the table. So is this unbeatable? Is this the best thing out there right now? That's what I'm hoping to talk about today. So today I go back to the beginning of Kill Team and I look at the top lists to find the truth, as well as looking at the question as somebody from the inside, somebody that played Tyranids at the same event. And there's a lot to cover here today, so just grab a brush, grab a new model, hit that like button, subscribe if you haven't already. If you're a new cultist, welcome. And let's talk about Tyranids and the concept of a Kill Team meta. So to start things off right, we need to go way back through the murky depths of time to, well, about 7 months ago when Kill Team first released. A lot of people jumped on board when the game first came out, but the first meta kind of ignored a big part of what makes this game special and different than regular 40K 8th edition, and that is the concept of a roster and the mustering phase of the game. Unlike regular 40K, you are not locked into a single take-all-comer style list in Kill Team. Instead, Kill Team lets you build a roster with 20 models in most events, and you can build your actual team on the spot just moments before the game starts, after you know the enemy faction and the mission that you will be playing. Now, if you know the opponent's strengths and weaknesses, or let's say you know that there's a popular list people are playing at the moment, the roster aspect of Kill Team lets you build a specific counter to that because you're not locked into anything besides the models that you put on your roster. You have the full 20 models at your disposal at any time to choose from before the games, even if you only put 5 models on the table in the actual match. This gives Kill Team, in my opinion, an ultra competitive aspect where most factions can have an answer of some kind for most factions. But in this earliest of days, when Kill Team first dropped, a lot of people didn't take advantage of this. What happened right away was a single list for the Death Guard faction emerged as particularly strong in this first part of the game's history, and this one list was used by quite a few competitive players even in tournaments against anybody and anything that came up. So we had what could be called the first meta build. Death Guard with 2 Marine Gunners, 2 Marine Fighters with Plague Flails usually, a leader, and 3 Poxwalkers. This was viewed as the #1 thing to take. But this didn't last very long. Even by the time that the Nova Open happened, people realized factions like Imperial Guard, for example, could take 9 plasma weapons in a single list. Death Guard were good, and the original build is still around today. But players started using the roster to counter that elite style of list while still keeping things like Flamers and Reserve on their roster in many cases. So the new meta became Plasma. Take as many as you can get and you're off to a good start. However, while this build did really well against Astartes, Death Guard, Death Watch, and other elite factions such as this, taking really good shooting is sometimes weak against factions that take a lot of bodies and can get you in close combat on turn 1. If you go back and watch some of my past videos, I talk about this in depth, how running things like Gene Stealers just decimated Imperial Guard. Even if they had Flamers in their list, there isn't an all-Flamer build in there too to counter hordes accompanying the all-Plasma builds that they already have in their roster that are meant to stomp elite factions. They might have some Flamers as an attempted reply to melee a lot of times, but not many players, at least from what I saw in these earlier days, had both counters running and were able to field both on demand. And as we saw in my last video discussing melee tactics, I showed that even against Flamers or Frag Cannons and other things that can do a lot of damage to spammy factions, having good positioning and just savvy play can still get you into CC while minimizing risk to yourself and your own models. So Death Guard is just plain good, but plasma spam counters Death Guard, but melee spam counters plasma. This is key to understand. This is an evolution. This is a Darwinian kind of a thing happening. So we also need to add to the discussion that a new style of play emerged recently. Arena and other objective-based games are all over right now, and those spammy lists that were countering plasma spam just so happen to also have a lot of bodies that they can use to grab objectives. Now we have a situation where all of this has kind of happened, and Tyranids, we've had a big event. Tyranids won that one event, and people are losing their minds. It seems like melee spam, I completely understand what they're thinking. It seems like melee spam is the perfect answer because it beats plasma, which was the former top dog that beat the former top dog, and it's been good for quite some time. And these Tyranids, they don't only just beat a really good kind of an archetype, a really good build, they also do well in objectives games. And so when it comes to the melee spam, the Tyranids can take one build in particular that lets them field 20 bodies. So they're really good at that. I understand where people are coming from. However, my hope in today's video is just to suggest for a moment that we slow down, we take a deep breath, and look at a couple of points that some people might not be considering when they're talking about Tyranids and how amazing they are. First, there is a weakness in the 20-man build. Again, to take what you took at LVO, that took top place, basically, you need to have 20 models in your roster. That is what you put down on the table. If somebody brings something to counter that, there is no answer that you have other than to keep going with what you were doing. So there is a weakness in that 20-man build. It is your entire roster. Suddenly, it's that Death Guard situation we talked about all over again, where people are playing one list to rule them all. And as we've discussed already, this success didn't last forever in the case of the Death Guard. So that's something that we kind of need to keep in mind here. And what I think about that first point. The next point that I see quite a bit as I talk to people and look around online is they say, hey, 2 NID players were in the top 8 at LVO. They were the only faction with multiple placings in the top 8. And yes, this is true. However, I think that NIDs were a bit overrepresented. So out of 36 players, 5 or 6 were playing NIDs. So 1 out of 6, no other faction had that many people show up and run anything to match that. Contrast that success where 2 out of the top 8 placed with other factions. There were only 2 Death Guard players in the entire event, yet one of those was in top 8 too. There was also only 1 Eldar player, and he took 2nd place. This gets even more important when you kind of try and keep in mind there was also no real presence by things that I think can deal with Hormigaunt spam very well, like the Thousand Suns. I bring this up because it shows some of what I kind of see as an error in thinking going on. For example, Thousand Suns not being in the top 8 doesn't make Thousand Suns not good, they just weren't there. Yet we kind of had the opposite thing happening with Tyranids. With nearly 2 out of every 10 players running NIDs, you would expect somebody to place with them. That doesn't mean they are suddenly the meta, not to me. Yes, they do well in objectives games. This is why I took them to LVO. And they do well, especially if you take a bunch of Hormigaunts, which both of us did. But a lot of factions can spam bodies and kill team, not just Tyranids. Heretic Astartes did this to great effect at Nova. And the fact is, Synapse and Instinctive Behavior is a double-edged sword that the other factions with a high body count do not have to deal with. Auto-passing nerve tests is very nice in kill team, but auto-passing nerve tests only happens if your gaunts are within 12 inches of a warrior to begin with. So even with a warrior on the table, you still need to have that careful positioning once flesh wounds start happening. And the 19 gaunt single list approach to objectives games that won at LVO only leaves room for the single warrior in the list. That's 1 Synapse creature. He's usually a gunner, and this guy actually, I think, wants to be run as a heavy spec for maximum efficiency. That's just my opinion, is that he doesn't want to be ran as a leader. So you're losing out a bit there too, in my opinion. Just another thing to kind of keep in mind. But what really matters is not just that. It's that if you lose the single warrior, you can easily be at a -1 to hit and a -2 to some charges if you don't just focus on targeting the closest model with those gaunts. No other faction has to deal with that. This is why I brought the second warrior in my own roster at LVO, because I wanted that redundancy. So that way, if things went terribly wrong and I lost one model, that didn't suddenly break my list. As we saw in the final round with Nids versus Eldar, that Synapse creature went down in turn 1, and after that, things were able to get really close against those tricksy elves. They almost took it. So, what I'm hoping to impress upon you is that Tyranids are not an auto-win button that you can pull out in objectives games and raffle stomp anything that the opponent puts down, in my opinion. I'm holding out to see, is this just a transitory stage in the constant evolution that is the kill team meta? Just like Death Guard in those early days, people now think it's a good idea to run a single list roster again. But I'm just here as the voice of warning for you that really leaves you open to getting countered, and people are expecting it now, which makes it even worse. Tyranids in general, but this single list specifically, has a target on its back now. People online are talking about how broken Nids and Kill Team are, and you're just going to have a lot of savvy players building things into their rosters to specifically counter this build in upcoming events, and I think they can do it. I think even basic Astartes can cause problems for this list. A lot of bodies on the board means there are times where you might have Gaunts close enough together for the opponent to split shots against them. In fact, you're going to likely be wanting to kind of group Gaunts purposefully if you do lose your warrior because of that buff to morale that happens when they stay together. Now, Astartes can bring flamers, but that's not all. They can bring missile launchers that shoot both frag and crack, making them a threat to big guys and little guys alike with just the one model. They can bring 2 Auspecs in the list, ignoring obscured penalties altogether twice per round, and a comm spec giving a +1 to hit. So 1 crack shot, that's strength 8, AP -2, doing D6 damage. They're capable of hitting on 2s and 3s with comm specs and Auspecs and all that, all good stuff just running around. So that's wounding that warrior on 2s. And if they roll a 3-up for the damage profile, that's a dead warrior in 1 round, unless you completely deny line of sight with him. So that's just 1 weapons profile. They can take 3 of those in a single list if they want, and they can also have things like the Ox Launcher on their comm spec Intercessor, which is another weapon able to very easily adapt to either monster hunting or potentially splitting shots onto multiple Gaunts. So that's just kind of one baseline idea for a simple counter off the top of my head. If you want to get even crazier, look at something like Thousand Suns. They have Warp Flame pistols, Warp Flamers, Soul Reaper cannons to hit the big bugs, and they have good CC and bodies through the Zangors. Something like the Thousand Suns, if they were to build a dedicated counter to a bug problem into their lists, into their roster, they could potentially cause some big problems for a 19 Gaunt list. If they run planned shake and break like the Eldar did at LVO, where all they're just trying to do is spam flesh wounds out of action, at LD5 with Gaunts, it's a very real possibility that once you lose that one warrior, things go bad. At that point, the enemy can just walk around picking up points wherever and however they want. Some lucky rolls and some good choices for secondaries on top of a hard counter is very possible. So despite other people proclaiming that Tyranids are the best thing in Kill Team right now, I think we should just wait and see how things play out. We're rushing to apply 40k concepts to a very different game, and one that is still new, one that is very much under constant changes at this point. Lists with 19 Gaunts are on the radar now. People will be preparing for it, and we'll just have to wait and see how things go over the next few tourneys. Taking a full roster, like I've said, with only 1 list means you have no adaptability through that roster where other factions do. So it has strengths. You can get those objectives. You have that one model with the auto-passing nerve test. It's good, but it also has weaknesses, and there is the potential of diminishing returns. Just for an example, I was maxing out on objectives points in games where I only ran 6 Gaunts at LVO, because you can only score 9 points for most of these missions for the objectives. So I'm personally thinking that the meta for Nids might just settle in a bit eventually, allowing more list flexibility to bring things like Lictors or multiple warriors for that extra synapse buff. And the 20-man single list might adapt over time to just become something more versatile. Maybe not the full 20, maybe peel a few back, allowing you to bring something else. Especially if we know people are going to be trying to counter Gaunt spam in upcoming events. I think this will be a smart thing for you fellow Nid players to consider, since things like Lictors really do well against more elite types of builds, and that might be exactly what comes after us. So, as a community, We just kind of really need to look at the lists closely and upcoming tourneys to see what specifically was run, because the question still stands. Are Tyranids the number one thing out there? I think that winning an event with lictors is very different than winning with 19 Hormagaunts. So if we're suspecting a counter and somebody playing bugs counters the counter and takes top 8 again, I don't see that the same as what people are currently suggesting, where 19 Gaunts and a Warrior Gunner is an auto win. So there's a few things we need to keep in mind and break down and consider here. The question isn't so much that people are asking, are NIDs broken? Are NIDs OP? Are NIDs an auto win? It's this one list. And so that's my 2 cents on the matter. And Objectives Games and the state that the game was at for LVO, this snapshot in time, the Tyranid list used was a great choice. It's something I considered myself. But if people are building up more versatile rosters than us bug players with specific counters included to match us, this success might just be a temporary thing that gives birth to another top dog that we see for a while that people call OP, that people say is the meta. We're playing paper, rock, scissors with dice, and I think there are too many counters and updates possible for one inflexible list to win forever. So that's it. That's just what I think on the matter. I hope you liked it. I hope you liked this video. If you did, slice that like button with your power sword or rending claw, subscribe, and be sure to let me know what you think in the comments below. Do you think the same way? Or do you perhaps see something a bit differently? Let me know about it. So that's it. This is Tyranids 40K, and I'll be back again soon. Wishing you guys all the best.